Okay, we're going to get started. So thanks for coming out on this pretty miserable afternoon. My name is Melissa Henriksen. I'm the Director for University Engagement at the Applied Research Institute, and we co-host this event with Katie and the ABA Foundation here in the park. We're restarting this series again for the academic year. This is our first one. We'll have another Grounds on the Go in November, and then 2 more in the spring, so keep your eyes and ears out for those invitations to join us later in the year. So I'd like to introduce our speaker today. We are very grateful to have Patricia, or Tish Jennings, here to talk to us about mindfulness. So Dr. Jennings is an Associate Professor of Education at the Curry School of Education at UVA. She is an internationally recognized leader in the fields of social and emotional learning and mindfulness in education, with a specific emphasis on teacher stress and how it impacts the social and emotional context of the classroom. Dr. Jennings led the team that developed CARE for Teachers, a mindfulness-based professional development program shown to significantly improve teacher well-being, emotional supportiveness, and sensitivity, and classroom productivity. Dr. Jennings is leading the development of Compassionate Schools Project curriculum, an integrated health education program designed to align with state and national health and physical education standards. She is co-principal investigator on a large randomized controlled trial being conducted in Louisville, Kentucky to evaluate the curriculum's efficacy. Earlier in her career, Dr. Jennings spent over 22 years as a Montessori teacher, school director, and teacher educator. She's the author of Mindfulness for Teachers, Simple Skills for Peace and Productivity in the Classroom. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. Before we begin, I'd like to find out who's in the room. How many of you know something about mindfulness? Oh, okay, great. How many of you have actually practiced it at least a few times? Okay, great. It's always good to know how many people here actually are familiar with what I'm talking about. So to give you a little bit more background about me, I've been practicing mindfulness since I was 17. And part of the reason I was doing it was that I was trying to recover from childhood stress, a serious childhood trauma, actually. And I really, at that time, this is a long time ago, they didn't understand childhood stress, and they didn't understand how it would impact kids' behavior and functioning in schools. And so I was kind of at a loss of how to recover for myself. And I happened to stumble upon Zen meditation at the time and started practicing it. And over the course of my whole life, I've seen how it's helped my life as well as the lives of many, many other people. And because I started out as a teacher, I started realizing that my own mindfulness practice was having a very positive impact on my own teaching. But I only realized this when I started supervising student teachers. So I would go into a classroom and I'd observe teachers and I'd see how stressed out they were and how reactive they were to student behaviors that I thought were really okay, you know? And so I started thinking, well, why am I so much better at handling this compared to these other teachers? And this was, I'm talking the 80s. So it was way before all this research had happened and we really understood anything about how mindfulness is helping us. So at that time, I decided to go back and get my doctorate. I was living in California at the time. I went to UC Davis in California to study human development. And at first I thought I wanted to study education or psychology, but when I found the human development program, it was exactly what I was looking for because I wanted to understand stress better, generally, so that I could see how to support not only the teacher's own well-being or workers' well-being in general, but how it might impact behavior in those workplaces. Because to me, you know, I know a lot of people who practice mindfulness regularly and they're big jerks. You might know some too. So to me, it's not the practice, it's how you apply it. And what I was hoping to see is if we teach these mindfulness practices and teach how to apply them in the way we behave and interact with others, then it could have a positive impact on the world. And that's really, and kids like me who were being exposed to these really traumatic home situations that made learning in school difficult. And actually I'm working on a book right now to support teachers' ability to see and understand children who've been exposed to trauma and provide better support to them. So that's my next project. What I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to briefly touch on what is stress. I'm going to talk about what are emotions, because stress and emotions are definitely related to one another. I'm going to talk about resilience and why it's important today, and then talk about mindfulness and how it can help us with the stress process. But before I start, I just want to see, do you guys know what a biohack is? That's part of the title. There's a big movement today about figuring out how to hack our physiology in a way that promotes health and well-being. So one of the things, what we're going to be learning about is what stress does to us, how we feel stress, how it happens, what triggers it, what it does to our bodies and our minds, and then how mindfulness might be a biohack for this stress response that we're living in today. Is anybody here not feeling stress on a regular basis? Today our lives are very stressful for a lot of different reasons, which we're going to talk about. But I just want to talk about stress for a moment. It was funny because when I got here, I saw this flagpole and I thought, I'm going to use this as an example of stress, okay? So, you know, if this is a wooden pole and I push on it really hard, I put stress on it, what will happen? It'll break, right? But if it was more flexible, if it was made out of rubber or something, it might be more flexible. Well, it's already been broken. That's why I thought it was a really good metaphor for. So a lot of us, and I'm including myself in this, are living with kind of a patch job, holding ourselves together. And now, one thing we have that's better than this flagpole is that we're actually human organisms, biological organisms, and we can heal this. So if we are walking around with this, there's hope. You know, I don't know about you all, but when I was a kid and I took biology, they told us that your brain is done growing by the time you're 18, which is crazy because it isn't really mature until at least 25 or 30, first of all. But it continues to grow and develop along with your whole body, and how your brain embodies your body, your mind embodies your body, so that we can build the resilience and recover from this. But when we're really rigid like this, we're more vulnerable to stress and we're more vulnerable to breaking, right? So learning to be more flexible and learning to be more resilient can help us keep from breaking like this. So I was glad to see this really nice little metaphor here for me. Okay. So, what happens to us when we feel stress? Well, the stress response evolved to help us survive. So what happens is when we feel stress, when we feel threat, any kind of threat, our amygdala is like an alarm system. It goes off. And what it does is it triggers a whole flood of neurotransmitters and hormones that get us ready to fight or flight, fight or run, right? I was looking for pictures for this. These are people fighting over water. You know, water's being given out to people in a drought and they're fighting over water. I mean, that is real fight. You're fighting for your life. You need water for your family. These folks are fleeing from 9/11. They're frightened. So this is how emotion and the stress response are connected to one another. Typically, when you're feeling anger, it's because you're preparing to fight. Typically, when you feel fear, your body is preparing to run, or sometimes there's cases where freezing is adaptive, so that you can also sort of freeze. Those are the ways that we evolved to deal with real physical threats. The other thing about emotions that are really important to understand is how do these emotions help us survive? And you may have heard of Paul Ekman. He was an emotion researcher who started his work back in the 60s. He was actually an advisor on the TV show Lie to Me. I don't know if any of you saw that. He discovered universal expression of emotion. That when we feel an emotion, all of us as human beings show it on our faces in a universal way. But he also realized that all of these functions were completely adaptive. So when you feel angry, when I feel angry, the first thing I notice is this. My shoulders kind of creeping up. The other thing I notice is my jaw, because I tend to do this. And what's happening is my body, even without me knowing it, when I'm starting to feel even a little annoyed, that's a feeling of being threatened. I start to do this. And the other thing that happens is my face goes into this sort of contortion. When somebody's really angry, I can go back to that picture, their face contorts in a very scary way. So, and you can see, look at the jaw on that guy. So when you start to notice these sensations coming into your body, it's a signal like, oh, this is anger happening. The other thing that happens is you get hot. Anybody ever feel that? You start to feel really hot. And if somebody else is getting angry and you're watching them, their face gets flushed. Because all the adrenaline in your system is pumping, getting your heart rate up and your blood pressure up, and it's getting you ready to really fight. So this biological process that we have, that we evolved, which is a normal biological process, it was intended to help us deal with situations where we were really under threat. Now, Paul Ekman wondered, well, what are these emotions doing to us? So what he's found was that he called them negative emotions, and negative emotions are typically anger, fear, sadness, things that typically you feel uncomfortable about. In the work we do in education, we don't use the word negative because it connotates something bad, and we're trying to help teachers and students recognize that it's just a normal human reaction. So being angry isn't bad. What's bad is what we often do when we're angry, right? But the feeling itself is not a bad thing. But what he discovered is that when we feel these emotions, it automatically triggers that stress response I was talking about. It also narrows your focus, because if I am threatened in some way, like if I'm running from that building during 9/11, where my vision is focused is, where is the exit? How do I get out of here? All of my attention, my whole body is preparing me to get out of danger, right? So I'm not paying attention to what's going on around me. I'm just looking for that street, that alleyway that's clear that I can get to. It also reinforces our negative perceptions or thoughts. And I think this one's really interesting because in that world that we lived in 1,000 years ago, being able to reinforce that feeling was important. Because if I'm running away from the falling building, I have to keep myself going. I have to tell myself this is really a scary thing, really, really scary. And so my mind will tell myself over and over again, this is scary, you gotta run, gotta run, gotta run. So our brains, when we're feeling afraid, do that. That's what, you ever hear of rumination? When you're feeling a little frightened about something, your brain's going, oh no, something's gonna go wrong, I know it. That's what our minds do when we feel afraid. When we feel angry, we tend to sort of over appraise the threat. So I'll give you an example of how anger does that from my own personal life. So one day, my husband and I have an ongoing kind of issue around cleanliness. Anybody else have that problem? And so I'm walking upstairs and his laundry's all over the floor. And I'm like, oh, he's such a slob. I'm starting to feel angry and frustrated. Why is he, and I was already in a bad mood. Oh, why can't he put his laundry away? Why does he have to leave it all over? Oh, he's such a slob. So here I am, immediately perceiving a threat to my own cleanliness and my own attachment to my clean house. And I'm putting it on, blaming him automatically in my head. And I'm calling him all kinds of names in my head, like slob and always. He's always doing this. See, this is how our mind reinforces, it gets us going, It kind of gets that anger going. Oh yeah, I have, sort of self-righteous indignation. Well, I have a right to be angry. He's a slob, So I walk into the room a little farther, and there's Zoe, our little terrier, giving me a guilty look. It was her. That she was the one who took the laundry out of the laundry basket. So here I am, totally getting on my husband's case. He wasn't there, thank heavens he wasn't there. But in my mind, I had already made him the bad guy in a situation that he didn't even have anything to do with. So this is how our minds work when we're feeling these strong emotions that are related to feelings of threat. We also have this tendency to have these reinforced automatic conditioning responses. So here's another example. When I was a kid, this was back in the day where kids could actually go out and play by themselves without supervision, which kids can't do that so much anymore. But it really required that we pay attention to the time, because if we came home late, we were in big trouble, big trouble. And usually before I had a watch, it was like the sun is going down, or there was some street light, some signal that, and if I didn't pay attention to it or I ignored it and I kept playing, I came home, whoa, I got in big trouble. So when I'm late, guess how I feel? Maybe some of you feel this way too. I feel really anxious. I feel like I'm threatened because as a kid, when I was late, it was threatening because sometimes I got spanked, right? So now, today, in this moment, when I start feeling like I'm going to be late, I automatically start feeling anxious and stressed out. My shoulders kind of come up. I kind of get tense around, I'm driving my car and I'm getting tense, and I start noticing that I'm speeding. I'm like, oh, I'm doing that again. And I have to stop and I have to go, wait a minute, I'll be all right. When I get to the doctor, I'll probably have to wait anyway. It's going to be all right. So this is how our automatic emotional reactivity becomes a programmed process in us. So the whole point of explaining this to you is to help you see what it is that we're talking about in terms of how mindfulness might help us hack this system. And then the other part of this that's really interesting is a few years ago, Barbara Fredrickson, who's also a professor, did some research around the positive emotions, because she thought, well, if the negative emotions help us survive, what do the positive emotions do? And one thing she noticed was that they didn't really have any kind of biological markers. It's like when you're feeling a good emotion, generally speaking, there's nothing that they can measure that's happening different than your normal state. So she thought that was really interesting. So she did this study where she took a group of people, maybe a little bigger than this group, and she showed them all a video that was really scary and got them really frightened. And she was monitoring their autonomic nervous system. So she saw their heart rates go up. She saw their biological reaction to this fear. Then she divided them up, randomly put some in a room with more scary video, another group with a travel movie that was kind of boring, and then another one with a movie of puppies frolicking. And she was still monitoring them. So which of those groups do you think recovered better biologically? The people with the puppies, yes. So what she proved was that the purpose of those positive emotions are to help us recover from what's going on in our body when we are feeling stress. Because, every day our body is going into this stress response, and sometimes it's really important for it to be doing that. But other times it's not. And we have to learn how to recover from it in order to keep ourselves healthy. Because these neurotransmitters and hormones that I was talking about, they are the root of diabetes, heart disease. A lot of the diseases that we're dealing with today have to do with chronic stress or chronic elevated stress hormones. So we want to bring our stress hormones back. And this is part of the process of becoming resilient. If you stay up here all day long, it's going to take a toll on your body. So bringing positivity into your life can really make a difference in helping you recover from a stressful moment. That's why when you've had a stressful moment in a situation and somebody makes the appropriate joke, I say that because some jokes are not appropriate, everybody laughs and it just releases the tension, right? And everybody starts feeling better. So these positive emotions can play a really important role. Now, one of the problems with this is that we all have something called a negativity bias. And this is another normal human thing. So the reason why we have a negativity bias is because you could imagine that it would be something that would be selected for. So if I'm walking down the path and I see a snake, if I jump back and go, ah, like that, I'm more likely to survive, right? As opposed to the person who goes, oh, maybe that's a snake, but I'm not sure. Let's see. I'm dead, right? That is what we call the Darwin Award. Did you ever hear about that? It's those people who do something really stupid to take themselves out of the gene pool. So that's how we have been left with this negativity bias to assume the worst. That's kind of what we do. So we have to make a particular effort to notice when we're feeling these positive, comfortable emotions and savor them when we're feeling them, like gratitude, joy, pride, all those moments where we're feeling really good. Like when you're working and something goes right and you have that moment of, oh, I'm so glad I'm doing this. I feel really good about my work. I feel like, those are the moments that we have to remember and cultivate because they will help us be more resilient in these stressful lives that we live today. Now, there's some other interesting things that these positive emotions do to our bodies. One of them is it widens our focus. Just the opposite of what happens when we're feeling these uncomfortable or negative emotions, the total opposite. And this has been proven with tests that show that your peripheral vision actually widens when you're feeling these comfortable emotions. You also feel more connected to other people, you understand other people's perspectives better, and you see the context of situations better, which can be very, very important to problem solving and planning and things like that if we understand all these different ways of looking at situations. So they can help us function better in whatever we're trying to do. And it also helps us be more creative, which is another important thing for work. So we've already sort of talked about resilience. It's this ability to bounce back or, fall over and come back up. And what we want to do is be able to have a strong connection with our bodies and be flexible and not too rigid, because if we're too rigid, we'll be like that pole. If we're too flexible, we also might fall over. So there's this sort of happy medium of where do I find this point of resilience where I'm aware of what's happening so I can monitor it. So being aware of our emotions can be very powerful to building resilience. When I start noticing that I'm getting angry or fearful, I can do something about it. In fact, I'm going to teach you one really quick, easy biohack. It's something you can take home and do anytime you want. So I invite you to just put your hands on your abdomen like this. And we're going to take 3 very deep, mindful breaths, and I'll explain what that means. If you want to, you can close your eyes, but not yet when we do this. We're going to be filling our lungs as full as we can, and hopefully you will feel your abdomen rise. It's like a diaphragmatic breath. You're trying to fill your lungs as full as you can. And then on the exhalation, you want to let go as much as you can. And while you're doing it, just pay attention to the sensation of the air coming into your nose, filling your lungs, filling your abdomen, or your lungs, and your abdomen rising, and then the opposite going out. Try to bring your full attention to that physical sensation. Okay? So we're going to take 3 breaths like this, and then you can just allow your breath to settle into its normal pace. And I invite you to close your eyes if you want. If you don't want to close your eyes, just lower your gaze and take your 3 deep, mindful breaths. And when you're done, just allow your breath to settle into its normal rhythm. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So a great deal of research has shown that this is a way to turn down the stress response, literally. It triggers the autonomic nervous system that acts like a brake that reduces that reactivity. And what we found in our research is that that practice, just noticing that you're getting stressed and taking those 3 deep breaths, makes a huge difference to people when they're feeling stressed. So it's a way of building resilience. You start noticing your stress, you notice it, you take these 3 breaths and you bring the stress back down. And if you can keep doing that throughout the day, you will find that your days in general are a lot less stressful. Now the trick is noticing when you need to do it. And this is kind of where mindfulness comes in. Now I want to just say something about why it's important today. Today we have so many stressors going on all the time. We're driving in cars on roads that we were not really adapted to do. We're having to deal with so much information all at one time. It's bombarding us. We're dealing with lots and lots more people than we're used to. And I'm talking sort of evolutionary, from an evolutionary perspective. And we are dealing with people that are a lot different than us, which is also new for us as a species. Because if you think about us 1,000 years ago, we lived in very homogeneous small groups. So, and the other thing is we're moving around a lot. So we're living in different places and having to adapt to different cultures and languages, and it's a lot to deal with. So we're much more stressed now than we've probably ever been in this way. But we also are less in danger, believe it or not, than we have ever been. We really, even though the news likes to make us feel like we're not safe, we really are in a very safe place in our history anyway. So, mindfulness. One of the things I like to make sure to distinguish about mindfulness is it is a trait. So some people are just naturally mindful, believe it or not, without any training. They're just mindful people. It's also a state that you can cultivate and be in at any time. So I can feel more or less mindful at any moment. And I've had many incidences where I've noticed my mindlessness. Like, for example, when you're driving along on a road that you go a lot, but you're not going that way today, and you end up going to work when you meant to go somewhere else. Those mindless moments, those become really obvious once you start realizing that you can be more or less mindful in any given moment. So and you can also practice mindfulness, which we're going to do in a minute. So again, which we just did, but we're going to do it a little bit more. So this is this awareness of something. You're focusing your attention on you're focusing your awareness on this present moment. And sometimes you focus your attention on something like the breath, like what we just did. So you're focusing all that attention on this present moment experience of this air going in and out of the body. Now that's just one way to practice mindfulness. It's probably the most basic, simple way to do it. Have many of you done that practice, the breath? Yeah, it's kind of the basic, we call it basic breath awareness. There's lots of other ways to practice mindfulness, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So it's bringing this present moment awareness to what's happening and focusing on something. But it also has this quality of curiosity and openness. It's sometimes called non-judgmental quality. I don't like to use that word because then when I start practicing with people, they say, well, I can't stop judging. I can't do this because I'm judging myself because I'm not doing it right. And I have to say to them, it's interesting to notice that your mind is judging yourself. You can observe that with some sense of openness. You can notice how judgmental you are in a mindful way. That's why I don't like using that word. I also have heard people say to me, well, I can't do that because I can't stop thinking. Anybody hear that before? Anybody think that before? You can give up on that one. You're not going to stop thinking. It's just, I can tell you because I've been practicing for over 40 years and I still think. The thought process changes a little bit. So often when you're thinking, you think you are the thinker. You are the thinker. I am thinking this. And sometimes our minds kind of drive us a little bit crazy because we're really caught up in our thoughts in a way. What mindfulness can help us do is take a little bit of a step back from those thoughts and notice the patterns of our thoughts. Notice the habits of our minds, because our minds do have these habits that can make us a little bit crazy. Some people say the mind has a mind of its own, right? And when you practice mindfulness, you start noticing that. What keeps distracting me today? Where does my mind go when I'm not paying attention to my breath? And then bringing my attention back. So the practice is recognizing that your mind wandered off into some thought somewhere in a gentle way, you can judge yourself, but you can notice that you're judging yourself, and then gently bring your attention back to this sensation. One of the reasons we like paying attention to the breath is because it's a natural, normal human function. You don't need any special equipment. You're doing it all the time. But it also starts to help us notice other physical sensations. And the more we're tuned in to our body and how our body's feeling, the better we are at managing our stress and managing our emotions, because we notice them more before they catch us by surprise. So, there's a lot of different kinds of practices, as I mentioned, and sometimes they're called contemplative practices. You may have heard of the Contemplative Sciences Center here at UVA. Sometimes they're called mindfulness, sometimes they're called contemplative practices. You can practice informally or formally, as I mentioned. You can walk more mindfully, you can do anything more mindfully, or you can have a regular practice of doing it every day. There's different kinds of ways to practice mindfulness. You can do it in a focused way, like we're going to do with the breath. And after a while, if you've been practicing for a while, you can let that focus kind of drift and open, and that's called open awareness. That's kind of a harder thing to do because it's when you start thinking, it's hard to bring your mind back to that centered open space. So often you have to go back to the focus and then allow it to open again. If you've been practicing for a while, then that is something you can try. There's a variety of different caring practices. Sometimes they're called metta or loving kindness practices that help us generate a feeling of care for ourselves and care for others. That's another kind of contemplative or mindfulness practice. We can do mindful walking. We can do something called a body scan, which brings awareness to every part of our body, so we start noticing where our stress is in our body, where we're holding it. I know if you're like me, I hold it right here all the time. And when I do that and I notice, oh gosh, all of a sudden people are rubbing their shoulders, then you can help yourself relax. This is also a great way to go to sleep at night. Movement can also be mindful, like yoga can be mindful, Tai Chi. I also do Pilates in a mindful way. I find Pilates incredibly mindful for me. So different kinds of movements. Also the arts can be mindfulness. If you're familiar with, especially the Japanese culture has lots of mindful arts, like ikebana is actually a mindful art, or tea ceremony in the Japanese culture is a mindful art. So, and archery, so sports can also be. Yeah, in Japanese culture, archery is a mindfulness practice. So. Let's see. I guess I'm going to go into the research before we start practicing. This is a really interesting chart because you can see down there at the bottom at 2000, this is 2000, look what's happened since 2000. These are peer-reviewed journal articles on mindfulness research. It's pretty amazing. And we know a lot now about what mindfulness is doing to help us. And you can see all those things there, how it can help us reduce our stress and improve our emotions and ability to concentrate. One of the big ones is the ability to use attention or awareness to regulate our emotions. And one of the things I like about this slide is this is a study that was looking at the brain, and this part of the brain, the limbic system, is the part where we process emotions. And the hippocampus is really involved in this emotional process as well as how we store our emotional experience here. And this is just after 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction. The group that got MBSR, their hippocampus increased in density. And this actually relates to all the other findings that we have that show improved emotion regulation that's related to stress reduction. So this is a biological evidence that we are hacking our biology. And I've been doing some research with teachers that she talked about earlier, and what we found, we did a large randomized controlled trial in New York City of teachers, and we not only found that the teachers' distress was reduced, but their emotion regulation improved, their mindfulness improved, and something called time urgency improved. Do you ever feel stress around time? Yeah, like you don't have enough time? Teachers feel that all the time because they're dealing with this clock and this lesson plan, right? And the kids, if they interrupt them, that's really stressful because they're trying to get finished before the bell rings. So we reduced that in those teachers too. But the part that I was really excited about is that we observed these teachers' classrooms. Like I said, I was interested in changing how people behave. And the classrooms were more positive. The teachers were more sensitive to their students. These were objective coders that were coding these classrooms who didn't know which group these teachers were assigned to. And also the students were more productive in those classrooms. Finally, the students were more engaged as well. So we saw in this study that mindfulness can help people in their workplace, but it can also help the people that they're trying to help, which is really exciting, and that is what I was hoping that I would be able to show. Now, this could also be done in other contexts, and I think it's really exciting to think about all the other work contexts where we might want to see mindfulness improving the outcomes of any kind of work that we're trying to do. So how is mindfulness helping us? How does this work? Now, I really love this quote by Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So I see mindfulness as this hack of reactivity, our automatic human tendency to react. It gives us a little space between this stimulus and this response that we can have. It broadens this space. And in that process, it allows us to make decisions or choose a path that goes where we want to go instead of where we habitually automatically go. And it also helps us really perceive, is this really a threat or not? Because today we are faced with lots of things that feel threatening, but they're not necessarily. So I would like to lead you in a short mindfulness practice. Are you all okay with 5 minutes of mindfulness? Anybody? Is that okay with everybody? Okay. So could we turn the lights down just a little bit? I'm going to stand over here because when I do this, my voice starts to get quieter, and I want you to be able to hear me. So put all your things down, and I encourage you, can you all hear me okay? Is the microphone working okay? Yes. Okay. You can put your hands in your lap. Before we start, could everyone turn their phones off, so we don't get interrupted with a phone call? And you can put your hands in your lap, but sit up nice and tall because we're going to be following our breath. You want to be tall but not stiff. You want to be relaxed but upright so that you can feel the air. And I invite you to close your eyes or just lower your gaze so your focus is really inside you. Now I invite you to just notice yourself sitting here on this chair in this room, feeling your body, the weight of your body on the chair, being present in this moment, in this room. And then shift your awareness to this sensation of your normal, natural breath. You can just breathe how you normally breathe. Feeling the air as it comes into your nose, down your windpipe, filling your lungs. Noticing the sensation of the air as it leaves your body. Noticing your abdomen as it rises and falls with each breath. you can experiment a little bit with this practice and try focusing your attention on different parts of this breath if you want. For example, you can focus your attention on your nostrils, noticing the sensation of the air as it goes in through your nostrils and then out through your nostrils. Noticing the temperature of the air as it goes in and comes out. You can also notice the sensation of your chest rising and falling. Just focusing on the lungs as they fill with air and the air leaves. Or you can trace the entire sensation of the air as it fills your nose and goes down the windpipe, all the way down to the lungs, filling them completely, and then the air goes out. Kind of like the waves in the ocean coming in and going out. And then for the last minute of the practice, just do what worked best for you. And if your mind wanders off, you just gently notice that it's wandered and bring your attention back to the breath. And when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. Do you want to turn the light back on? Did that feel like 5 minutes? No? How long did it feel to you?
Faster than that.
It felt like less time than that? Yeah. For some people, did it feel slower than 5 minutes? It's just interesting how it affects our perception of time. So at first, when I started practicing, my thoughts were really drawing my attention away a lot. But over time, what happens is they sort of settle. They're there, but I'm just not really paying attention to them. It's kind of like having the TV on in the other room. It's there, but I'm not really focused on it. Every once in a while I hear something and I want to know what's going on, so I pay attention, and then the practice is, oh, I'm not paying attention to that right now. I'm bringing my attention back to this breath. So I'd like to give you just a minute or two to share your experience with each other and maybe talk about how that was with each other. So you could just turn to the people near you and give you a minute or two to do that. Okay. Yeah, this is great. This is really great. I want to make sure I have some time for questions. The last thing I just want to leave you with is why this is so important. So our biological stress response system evolved to deal with this. Really, literally, running away from a lion, or fighting with the tribe over on the other side of the hill that wants to take our water. That's what these were, real physical threats. But today we don't have those physical threats. We are feeling stress because we feel threatened in some way, but it's psychological stress. It's a psychological issue, and often this occurs in our workplace. We feel threatened by a colleague, or we feel threatened by our boss or a customer. And when we feel threatened and we get into this reactivity, it interferes with our functioning. So we do and say things that are not appropriate for a situation where we're really not threatened, really threatened. And we see this all over the place. And one of the reasons I got really interested in it with schools is this is our future. Like these children, if we can help teachers and students learn how to do this, I think we have some hope for all of us being able to be our best in these work contexts where we're trying to make the world a better place. So I want to answer any questions you might have. Yeah.
How distracting is music in the background or something like that?
You know, this is a really good question. And this is something that's taken me many years to learn. Whatever works for you. And I have to say that it's really emphatically. Because, you know, some meditation teachers or mindfulness people say you have to do it like this, you have to do it like that. And what I found from my own experience is depending on what's going on with me, I need something different. You know, there's going to be times, and I know this from my own experience, where focusing on your breath could be really uncomfortable. If you're feeling really traumatized about something, it's really hard to do that. It feels very uncomfortable. If that feels too uncomfortable, do something else. Pay attention to nature. Walk in nature. That might be a better experience for you for a while. If you're having a real tough time with somebody, a person, doing some kind of a caring practice might be exactly the thing you need to get over your own resistance or uncomfortableness about that person. If you like music, go for it. You know, you might want to experiment with different kinds of music. One recommendation I have if you want to build a practice for yourself, there's an app. There's lots of apps now, tons of them. But the one I use is called Insight Timer, INSIGHT Timer. And it's free, and it has a whole bunch of guided practices, including music that you can listen to if you want, and sounds like rain sounds or ocean sounds or things like that. So I recommend you experiment, you know, because this biohacking is very individualized. You know, you have your own nervous system that you have to learn about, and learning what triggers you and when you need to do what is part of this process of learning this to master this biohack. So if anybody tells you have to do it this way, you know, tell them Dr. Jennings said, no, that's not true. Yeah?
But if you're in a stressful situation, for instance, the teacher is working against the clock, you can't just stop and start reading.
That's a really good point. Were you a teacher?
No.
Well, you know, one of the reasons, when I went back and studied stress, all of a sudden it made a lot of sense to me why teaching is so stressful. Teachers are often in a room like this with about this many people, but they're little people, and they can't leave. You know, like they have to figure out how to regulate in this context. Now, all these other little people are also moderately regulated. And so you've got a lot of emotional energy going around, and it's like a pressure cooker. So what we find with teachers, you're right, you can't just all of a sudden start breathing, but you know what they do? What they're doing now is when they start to feel stress in this moment, because you interrupted me and I've got the bells ringing, what I would do, and I've seen many teachers do this, is I say, oh, you know, sometimes I feel really stressed. And when I do, I notice my shoulders get tense, I notice my heart's beating, I notice I get hot. And what I need to do when I feel this way is I need to take some breaths. So let's all take some breaths together. And usually what happens is the whole classroom settles. And because the teacher is actually modeling for those students how to do that. And the teacher's being honest, because the kids know you're stressed out, whether or not you even know it. And they feed on it. So being honest about it and modeling it and teaching it. And it's interesting because the teachers I know that are doing this in their classrooms often say that when a substitute comes, they say, we have to do our breathing. And the substitute doesn't even know what they're talking about, you know, so they ask a student, well, could you lead it? And they do. And some of the work we've been doing in the city and the county here, if the teachers forget to do it with their students, the kids remind them, you know, I can tell right now we need to do our breathing. But that's a really good question. Anybody else? Yes.
I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what the caring practice
Sure.
is. I never heard of that.
Yeah, you know, this is a traditional Buddhist practice that we've taken and modified because everything that we do with our work is completely secular. It doesn't require any belief. It's really a biological process or a psychological process. So what it is the first thing you do is you imagine yourself, you think about yourself, and you imagine offering yourself well-being and happiness and peace. So in your mind, you're visualizing yourself and you're giving yourself this feeling of care, like feeling about caring for yourself. And then the next step in that process is to think about somebody who you love dearly, like your partner, your child, somebody who you love deeply. And then you imagine them, and then you imagine sending or offering that feeling of care to them. And what happens is you start to feel this big, warm, open heart, and you cultivate that. The next step, that's easy to do, right? It's not so easy to give it to yourself. It's really easy to give it to your loved one. The next step is to think about somebody neutral, maybe a neighbor, somebody you don't have any feelings about one way or the other, and you try to offer that same care to them. So you're expanding this feeling of care out to people. And you're doing it in your mind. You can either visualize them as happy and well, or you can say it in your mind, may you be happy, may you be kind, may you be peaceful. You know, so you're offering it. And what you're doing is you're feeling your own sense of caring for others open. Finally, you think about somebody who you have difficulties with. And I always encourage people to pick somebody not too difficult because it's hard. When you start to do it, you'll see. So I pick somebody mildly annoying maybe to start, and then you do the same thing. You offer them your care, and you're doing it for yourself. It's not we're expecting it to affect them. It's to build this heartfulness that you're trying to cultivate. And the intention of that is to help you keep your compassion and heart open to people, even challenging people. And then you come back to yourself and offer that to yourself. Now, I know Insight Timer has these practices on it. It's usually called Metta, M-E-T-T-A, or loving kindness practice. And so we've seen wonderful impacts of this practice on people's overall well-being, but also their ability to extend care to people who are challenging. And a lot of us work in situations where we have to do that, right?
So challenging versus threatening are two different things.
Right.
If you're working with someone that's a challenge because you feel threatened by them.
Well, it's your perception, right? Are you really threatened by them, or are you perceiving, is it psychological threat or is it physical threat? Because
Well, I imagine it's not physical, or they would be a colleague, right?
yeah, so it's totally normal and natural for us to perceive psychological threat as real threat. And that's what our bodies do. And part of mindfulness helps us kind of reappraise that as well. So when I'm starting to feel those feelings and notice those feelings, like my shoulders and all that, one of the first things I do now after doing this so I did all this practice all these years, and then for the last 15 years I've been doing this emotion awareness work for teachers. And now, whenever I start feeling a strong emotion, my first thought is, am I really threatened? And why am I imagining that I'm feeling threatened if I'm not really threatened? Like, what's the psychological threat? And usually it's a trigger of some perception, like the being late, you know. For example, if I worked for somebody who got really mad at me if I was late, whoa, that would feel like a real physical threat because I got spanked when I was a kid. But I'm really not threatened, you know. And the fact that this person is angry because I'm late is probably because they have that script. And they think that I'm being disrespectful about being late, even though I couldn't help it because I was stuck in traffic or whatever, you know. So mindfulness can help us sort of separate the real from the imagined threat. Does that make sense? And it's hard. It's really hard because our minds want to hold on to that threat. We're biologically imprinted to do that because of the Darwin Award. Yeah.
Do you have like an ideal time or amount of time that you should try to practice mindfulness, or like a tipping point where you really start to notice the benefits of mindfulness or meditation after practicing?
That's a really good question too, and there isn't an empirical answer to that. I recommend that if it's hard for you, start with 5 minutes, like we just did. That's a great starting point, and then extend it maybe to 10, then maybe to 15, and then to 20. The thing that's most important is to try to make it regular. And if one day you wake up and you go, I can't do this more than 5 minutes, just do 5 minutes. If another day you feel like you have more time or you feel more ready to do longer, then do longer. You know, follow yourself, but be committed to doing it regularly, because it's the regularity that you'll notice the effects more than anything. And then during your day-to-day life, see if you can bring it into your day-to-day life when you're doing something, like standing in line. If you're like me and I'm standing in line and start going, why do I have to stand in this line? Oh, okay, hey, I can practice standing mindfully. I can notice my weight on the ground. I can feel my body standing here and practice. I can breathe. I can do some breath awareness, you know? So try to bring it, and that can also help you build resilience, because instead of standing there going, why do I have to wait in this line, and getting my stress level up here, I'm actually giving myself a chance to chill out. And finding those moments, and that's the other thing that we're finding with teachers, is that there are lots of times in their day where they can do that, but you know what they often do? They get their phones out and start checking their emails. So if they don't do that. Don't, put your phone away and take a couple of breaths. There's lots of times in our day where we can do that, and that way we're bringing that stress response down over and over again instead of keeping it up here all the time. How are we doing with time?
Does anyone else have any?
One more question?
Mindful walking?
Yes, I'll briefly tell you what that is. You can look up all this stuff online. If you Google mindful walking, you'll see. The idea of mindful walking is you're attending to the weight of your feet on the ground. So the same way you're attending to your breath in breath awareness, you're noticing your weight as it's shifting from one foot to the other. The attention is all down on the soles of your feet. When you first start doing it, it feels kind of weird, and you kind of do it slowly. But after a while, you can do it with your normal walking, but it just takes a little practice. So you can focus your attention on anything that can help you stay focused, whatever works best for you. All right, well, thank you all. Oh, I wanted to just tell you, I have this book, Mindfulness for Teachers, and if you want to contact me, that's my contact information. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Yeah.